Of course, it has been a little bit of a chaotic year. I would say more in the House than the Senate, but a lot has been going on. As the end of the year wraps, what are some of the biggest accomplishments you have to bring home to Texas, and what is still left on the to-do list? I know it's quite lengthy.
Well, one of the most important things that we're working on right now is the National Defense Authorization Bill, and hopefully that'll get wrapped up here in the next day or so. But obviously, Texas is home to, I think, about 10 military installations. We have a lot of active duty military and their families and veterans and their families. And this provides them a cost of living pay raise and tries to make sure that we remain the single strongest superpower in the world, because that's what keeps the world safe. That's deters other tyrants, bullies, dictators, and the like. And unfortunately, we know that the world has become an even more dangerous place with the invasion of Ukraine, obviously the terrorist attack against Israel in Gaza, and of course, Iran being behind that, and then China threatening in Asia. So national security, I think, is the single most important thing that we do here. And that, I think, will hopefully be able to get that bill across the finish line. And we also have other unfinished work in the form of aid to Israel. And Israel has been a traditional ally of ours, and their strong bipartisan support. Unfortunately, the House passed a $14.3 billion aid package on November the 2nd, and Senator Schumer has not taken that up here in the Senate. So as the days wind down here toward the holidays, there's not much time left. There's also a lot of concern about Ukraine. I share the belief that Ukraine, our assistance, is in our national security interest, but why Senator Schumer decided to jam things here toward the end of the year, again, is a mystery to me. But one of the things we will not do is to pass a Ukraine and Israel package without taking care of our southern border. This is not just more money for Joe Biden's open border policies. This is about policy changes which will limit, if not prevent, the exploitation of our asylum system and allow the catch and release of millions of migrants into the interior of the United States. That's like a flashing green light for the smugglers who get rich smuggling people and the drug cartels who smuggle drugs into the United States. So that's the unfinished business we need to do between now and Christmas.
And definitely want to dive in deeper to some of those topics. But first, I saw an NBC News report yesterday, or today rather, yesterday, either way, that there was a classified briefing yesterday amongst senators. I don't know if you were in the meeting, but it was discussions about the aid packages for Israel and Ukraine. And reportedly, many Republican senators stormed out of the meeting. And I'm just curious why that happened after the border security issues were brought up.
Well, it was even though the president has requested $106 billion in emergency assistance, the second largest component of that is for the border, but it's to facilitate the current open border policies. And as I indicated, we're not going to do that. And what we said at that hearing was that meeting yesterday, the classified briefing, is that we were going to insist on policy changes to prevent the asylum system from being abused and to stop this practice of catch and release, which has resulted in so many people being released into the United States. This is a national security problem because we know that there are people on the terrorist watch list, the no-fly list, and so far this year, 24,000 Chinese nationals have been released into the interior. And that doesn't count the 1.7 million gotaways. That's what the Border Patrol calls people who are identified on cameras or other sensors, but they have not been detained. They weren't caught. They've gotten away. And of course, you can imagine if they're trying to avoid law enforcement, they're probably up to no good. So this is a very dangerous situation. On 9/11, 2001, 19 people killed 3,000 Americans. And given the porous nature of the border and the people coming across, both known and unknown, I think this is a very dangerous situation. So we're going to insist that it be dealt with as part of this negotiation.
Are you having any progress on that front? I see you've made several floor speeches in the last couple of weeks talking about the need for having the border security funding in the overall supplemental funding package. Any luck there so far? Because there's, of course, a lot of other major policy issues tied in that package.
Right. Well, yes, I've been consistent in saying that this has to be dealt with. Unfortunately, Senator Schumer is sort of shrugging this off. We'll have a key vote this afternoon as we vote to proceed to this package. But my prediction is, my expectation is it will fail and provoke maybe a more serious negotiation about the border. I think Senator Schumer thinks he can just sort of bluff his way through this. And because there's so much support for Ukraine and Israel, that will carry through the current spending policies for the current Biden administration open border policies. So we're not going to let that happen. But this afternoon, I think we'll demonstrate to the majority leader our resolve in dealing with this issue. And he's got a choice to make. Is he going to get the aid for Israel and Ukraine? And if so, then it's going to cost him some policy changes on the border that help states like Texas and the entire country deal with this incredible humanitarian and public safety crisis.
Do you think that buildup of pressure is going to be the thing that ends up, as you alluded to, getting the border security aspects in this package? Because Israel just said that it had one of its worst ground operation days since the conflict began. We know that this aid for Israel and Ukraine is urgent. And as you know from being in Congress, as long as you have been, the border security policy issues on immigration, it's very complex and difficult to get across the finish line. So is this a bigger strategy, or do you think it should be addressed as a standalone bill for such a complex topic that, as you know, is difficult to work on with your colleagues across the aisle?
Well, you're right. We've been talking about immigration and border security for the entire time I've been in the Senate. And that's all that's happened is talk, no action. And meantime, things have just gotten progressively worse at the border. And Texas and Texans are paying the price because of the failure of the Biden administration's policies. So I see this as a unique point of leverage to force the administration to talk to us about policy changes that will change what's happening at the border for the better. This current situation is unsustainable. So this is a unique circumstance where there are things that I support in the package, but I can't and won't support that proceeding to that until we get a satisfactory answer to the policy changes that we need at the border to limit and I would like to say stop the flow of illegal immigration, but I would say probably more likelihood to significantly slow it down.
And a big part of the immigration impasse, as you know, is the push to pass the Secure the Border Act, which includes narrowing who is eligible to apply for asylum. What do you believe needs to change when it comes to asylum policy? Is there room for negotiation there?
Well, right now, people are traveling from all around the world and showing up at our border and claiming asylum. This is not a case of Central Americans or South Americans or Mexicans coming to the border because they're poor and they need a job and they want to work. This is very different. This is a transnational criminal organizations that smuggle people from all around the world for a price per head. And then they show up at the border, and because there's not adequate detention facilities built by the administration, they're simply released. Some of them are given a court date, but if you go to places like New York, it could be 10 years off. Others don't even claim asylum, but are released because the administration doesn't want them clogging the border and doesn't like the public relations problems associated with that. So they just simply release them. This is a big blinking green light or a welcome mat to the folks that get rich exploiting the border. And as I indicated earlier, it's not just the migrants; it's the dangers potentially associated with that. It's the drugs that took the lives of 108,000 Americans last year alone. Fentanyl alone took 71,000 lives. And I've been to 6 different school districts around the state of Texas and grieved with parents who lost their child as a result of inadvertently, unwittingly, I should say, consuming fentanyl, which is a deadly opioid. So this is a very serious problem, and we intend to make sure that we hold the administration's feet to the fire, and this is a perfect opportunity to do that.
Of course, another part of the act includes restarting work on building the border wall, including using eminent domain to seize landowners' property for that. Do you believe that building the wall is an effective way to address the issues on the border, especially as Texas, as you know, passed a $1.5 billion package to do its own work on building the border wall?
Well, as I indicated, a lot of the migrants are showing up and turning themselves in. So obviously a border wall won't affect that. And so I would say this is part of the puzzle. It's not the only part. Traditionally, the Border Patrol, which is my source of information over the years, has told me you need 3 things. You need infrastructure, which you call that fence or wall. You need technology, and then you need the Border Patrol. You need adequate boots on the ground. I would just add to that now, as we've discussed, the policy changes that will prevent people from showing up in droves and then being released into the interior, the asylum policy changes that I mentioned. So yeah, building the infrastructure is important, but right now that's not perhaps the most important thing we can do.
Some House Republicans have really drawn a line in the sand on this issue, saying that they're willing to risk a government shutdown if the Secure the Border Act doesn't pass. Where do you stand on that idea, especially since the president said he would veto the legislation?
Yeah, well, my hope is that we can deal with that this in the next couple of weeks in the context of this emergency supplemental appropriation bill, and so it's not tied to the funding for the federal government. As you know, there's been a temporary continuing resolution passed, which extends government funding to January the 19th, and a second one that extends beyond that. So this will potentially decouple this border issue from that overall government funding bill and avoid the drama of another government shutdown. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't solve any problems, because when you reopen, the same problem's staring you in the face. So I think maybe one benefit of having that debate and negotiation in the context of this emergency supplemental for Israel and Ukraine will separate it from the overall government funding discussion.
And then diving a little more into the NDAA, that's been held up for, I think, more than 2 months now. Where do those negotiations stand, and how concerned are you about our military readiness in light of all of the world conflict going on?
Well, I'm very concerned about our national security. I've never seen more threats to world peace and our national security than I've seen now. I'm a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and so I get classified briefings on a regular basis about what those threats look like. And it's very, very dangerous and a very fragile set of circumstances. For some reason, the majority leaders decided to cram all this business in at for the holidays. So I guess thinking that he will force people to vote on things that maybe he could have put on the floor much earlier and disposed of. But I'm optimistic here in the next day or two that we will wrap up the National Defense Authorization Act bill. It's in the conference committee right now. There are a few loose ends that need to be tied up, but that's going to be done soon. And I think it's absolutely critical that it be done, so that it be done. And it includes a pay raise for our troops and our families. And I think it provides a pathway to replenishing some of the weapons that we've supplied to Ukraine, and that we've obviously seen our domestic industrial base has not been adequate to generate the sort of munitions and other weapons that we need, perhaps in places like the Indo-Pacific and Taiwan, if President Xi decides to move there. So, as I said, it's a very dangerous situation. So I'm glad at least it looks like we're going to be able to wrap up the defense authorization bill here in the next couple of days.
And lastly, last week, the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to authorize subpoenas for Haron Crow, who Democrats are looking into the gifts he reportedly provided to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. You and Senator Cruz walked out before that vote. I'm curious as to why.
Well, first of all, I think this issuing subpoenas with no legitimate legislative purpose to private citizens is a very dangerous precedent. These aren't government officials that we're providing oversight of. And the fact is that Mr. Crow offered 5 years of records, but was told that that wasn't unacceptable. And the committee wanted 25 years, which is extreme and is unreasonable. But so much of this is just a decades-long effort to undermine the court in the eyes of the public and undermine public confidence in the court. In the end, the reason why we walked out is because we didn't believe that process was legitimate. And one of the things one of the rules around here is if you don't wrap things up in 2 hours, then while the Senate's in session, then the committee must shut down its operation. But as you probably saw, the chairman basically tried to silence any sort of debate. So there was no real debate. It really was a futile and vain effort to try to put pressure on private citizens. And I know Senator Cruz and I both believe that those subpoenas will never issue because the Senate rules will not allow it.
All right, Senator Cornyn, another busy week on Congress. Wishing you the best of luck at the end of this term before the holidays.